Hello. We are going over the 324 biblical prophecies that prove Jesus is the Messiah. You are watching this on the Halachgoy channel of YouTube. I'm a Halachgoy, and you can be one too. 324 biblical prophecies that prove Jesus is the Messiah. Prophecy number 59. The mouths of babes perfect his praise. We find this prophecy in the book of Psalms, chapter 8, verse 2. From the lips of children and infants you have ordained praise, because of your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger. We find the fulfillment of this prophecy in the book of Matthew, chapter 21, verse 16. Do you hear what these children are saying? They asked him. Yes, Jesus replied. Have you never read, from the lips of children and infants you have ordained praise? So in the book of Psalms, we learn that from the lips of children and infants, God has ordained praise. And in the book of Matthew, we find children and infants praising. Let's look at chapter 21 a little bit more closely. It starts out, Jesus is coming into Jerusalem. This is the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, where Jesus goes onto a donkey and is led into Jerusalem. People are putting their palm trees and they're saying, Hosanna to the King. Let's read it here. They brought the donkey and the colt, placed their coats on them, and Jesus sat on them. A very large crowd spread their coats on the ground, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds went ahead of him, and those that followed shouted, Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest! When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, Who is this? The crowds answered, This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. So the crowd is very excited. A prophet is coming into Jerusalem. They're waving palm branches. They're saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Jesus enters the temple area and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. At this point, the atmosphere changes. It was a very excited parade. It was a triumphal entry. Everyone was happy. There was a lot of anticipation, a lot of hopes in the crowd that Jesus would be the Messiah. He's coming in, and one of the possible symbols of the Messiah is that he would come in on a donkey. He comes in, he goes to the temple, everyone's excited, they expect something to happen, and for reasons that really were not understood to the crowd, he started knocking over the tables that were set up in the temple area. The blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple area, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. "Do you hear what these children are saying?" they asked him. So the leaders in the temple were upset. They don't complain about Jesus healing the sick. That's not seen here. They're not complaining, hey, how come you're healing sick people? They're complaining because the kids are running amok. Now, the grown-ups had already kind of calmed down. I mean, if the grown-ups were anticipating Jesus was going to do something good, knocking over the tables sort of knocked over their hopes that they had in this man. They realized that his mind really wasn't where it needed to be the Messiah. The children were still enthused, and that is the importance of Psalm chapter 8, verse 2. "From the lips of children and infants you have ordained praise because of your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger." What's happening in the book of Matthew, everybody who has an intellectual grasp of things were basically walking away from Jesus. The crowds were walking away from Jesus. The priests were opposing him at this point. They were demanding an explanation as to why he's tearing the place up. The children were the only ones that were still running around saying Hosanna. The children did not have an intellectual grasp of things. They were grasping into the excitement of the day the way children do. They were motivated by an internal mechanism that exists within children to be enthused about anything. They were still running around at this point, considered by all the grown-ups involved, in an inappropriate manner. They were running around shouting in the temple area. Jesus understood that where their shouts were coming from. He understood that children have an enthusiasm that comes from a place that most of us shut up inside of ourselves. Jesus understood this. He could relate to children. When the disciples said, "Hey, keep the children away from him, don't bother him," Jesus said, "Let them come to me." And at this point, he is still relating with the children, even though the children had no theological grasp of what was going on. Everybody else knew it was a mess. They still stayed excited, and that was something that he spoke up in favor of. And in a sense, we should all speak up in favor of it too. It's often very difficult for children to act the way that they do, for grown-ups to handle children acting the way they do. They act childish, and they blunder. They're growing up. They're learning from their mistakes. These children later on could learn from their mistakes. They could grasp things. The question is, when they grow up and they grasp things, are they still going to have their enthusiasm that they had as children? God looks for that enthusiasm. God wants that enthusiasm to exist in each one of us. And Jesus supported that enthusiasm, and for that, I say good for him. Does that mean does that mean that Jesus was the Messiah? Well, I find the question to be totally irrelevant to whether or not he was the Messiah. But he was definitely in favor of children. And so for that, I give him a thumbs up. The next prophecy we'll be looking at, his humiliation and exaltation. Psalms chapter 8, verses 5 and 6. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.